Imagine someone in your community stole something valuable or hurt someone else without a good reason. Today, the process feels almost automatic. Police get involved, courts decide the outcome, maybe a jail sentence follows. Now, remove every single part of that system. No police, no courts, no jail cells, no written laws at all. This is exactly the world early humans lived in for the vast majority of human history. And yet, somehow, their community still found ways to deal with wrongdoing. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how early humans handled crime and conflict without anything resembling the justice systems you rely on today.
It's tempting to assume that without formal punishment, early human life must have been chaotic and lawless. But that assumption doesn't hold up well under closer examination. Early human groups were small, tightly connected, and almost entirely dependent on cooperation to survive. This created a very different relationship with wrongdoing than the one modern society has today. In a small group, everyone knew everyone. There were no strangers to blame, no anonymous crimes. If someone stole food or broke trust in some way, the entire group usually knew exactly who did it almost immediately. This alone changed everything about how wrongdoing was handled. There was no need for an investigation, no need for evidence to be gathered and presented. The social consequences began almost instantly, simply because everyone already knew what happened.
So what actually happened once a wrongdoing was recognized? The first and most common response was social pressure, disapproval expressed openly by the group. No formal accusation was necessary. Cold behavior, being excluded from conversations, reduced sharing of food or resources. In a society built entirely on cooperation, this kind of social discomfort was often more effective than any formal punishment could ever be. Compare that to how punishment works today. Modern justice systems are largely impersonal. A judge who has never met you decides your fate based on written laws and structured evidence. Early human punishment was the exact opposite. It was deeply personal, precisely because everyone involved actually knew each other and depended on each other for survival.
This is likely one of the reasons social exclusion carried so much weight in early human life. Being cut off from the group wasn't just emotionally painful. In a world without stores, without money, and without any way to survive alone for long, it could genuinely threaten your ability to stay alive. The fear of losing group support functioned as one of the most powerful deterrents against wrongdoing that has ever existed in human history. Now, compare that to how exclusion feels today. Being left out of a friend group or losing social standing online still triggers intense emotional discomfort, even though your physical survival isn't actually at risk. This isn't a coincidence. It's the same ancient psychological wiring still fully active in your brain, just operating in a world where the original life or death stakes no longer apply.
For more serious wrongdoing, early humans had additional methods beyond simple social pressure. One of the most significant was restitution. If someone damaged property or took something that wasn't theirs, the expected response was often to repay or replace what was taken, rather than being punished purely for the sake of punishment. This approach focused less on revenge and more on restoring balance within the group. This is strikingly different from how many modern justice systems operate. Today, punishment is often separated entirely from repair. Someone can serve years in prison without the actual harm they caused ever being meaningfully addressed or repaired for the person affected. Early human communities, by necessity, often prioritized fixing the actual damage over simply inflicting suffering as a consequence.
There's a practical reason for this difference. Early human groups were small, and every single member mattered enormously to overall survival. Permanently removing someone from the group through something resembling modern imprisonment would have weakened the entire community, not just punished one individual. This meant early humans had strong incentives to resolve conflict in ways that preserved the group's strength, rather than simply punishing for its own sake. For genuinely serious offenses, however, early human groups did have more severe consequences available. In extreme cases, someone could be temporarily or permanently exiled from the group entirely. This wasn't a decision made lightly. Exile in the ancient world was an incredibly serious consequence, since surviving completely alone outside the safety of a group was extremely difficult and often deadly.
This reveals something important about how early humans thought about punishment overall. The most severe consequence available wasn't confinement. It was removal from community and protection entirely. In many ways, this created a natural hierarchy of consequences that scaled directly with how much trust had actually been broken, rather than relying on a single rigid system applied the same way to every offense. Now, here's something worth considering carefully. Without formal courts, how did early human groups avoid punishing the wrong person, or avoid conflicts spiraling into repeated cycles of revenge? This is where group involvement became critically important. Punishment wasn't typically decided by one single angry individual acting alone. It generally involved input and agreement from multiple respected members of the group.
This built in a natural check against impulsive or excessive punishment. If one person's reaction to a wrongdoing seemed unreasonable or disproportionate, other group members could push back or refuse to support it. Justice in early human life wasn't perfect, but it was rarely completely unchecked either, since the same social pressure used to discourage wrongdoing could also be used to discourage unfair or excessive punishment. This is actually strikingly similar to something modern legal systems still attempt to achieve through very different formal mechanisms: juries, multiple judges reviewing serious cases, appeals processes. The underlying goal hasn't changed at all throughout human history: prevent punishment from resting entirely in the hands of one single person's judgment or emotional reaction in the moment.
There's also a deeper psychological reason early human punishment systems worked as well as they did despite having no formal structure at all. Humans are naturally highly sensitive to social reputation. Even today, being known within your community as trustworthy, honest, and cooperative carries enormous personal value, even when no formal punishment is directly at stake. Early humans lived in a world where reputation wasn't just a nice social bonus, it was directly tied to survival itself. Being known as untrustworthy could mean less cooperation, less food sharing, less protection during moments of danger. This made the fear of damaging one's reputation an incredibly powerful force for preventing wrongdoing long before it ever actually happened, functioning almost like an invisible, internalized law enforcement system, operating entirely through social awareness alone.
Compare that to today, where reputation still carries significant weight, even in an anonymous, disconnected modern world. Online reviews, professional references, word-of-mouth recommendations. Humans still instinctively care deeply about how others perceive them, even in situations where formal punishment for bad behavior isn't realistically possible or enforceable at all. The underlying instinct clearly never disappeared. It simply adapted to fit a completely different scale of society. Now imagine what daily life would genuinely feel like without any modern justice system at all. No police to call, no courts to appeal to, no formal laws written down anywhere to reference. Every single conflict would require direct social negotiation, immediate accountability, and constant awareness of your own reputation within the group. There would be no anonymity to hide behind, and very little room to avoid the direct social consequences of your own actions.
In some ways, this sounds exhausting compared to modern systems. But in other ways, it created an environment where accountability was immediate, personal, and deeply tied to genuine relationships rather than distant, impersonal institutions. Modern justice systems solve the problem of scale, allowing punishment to function fairly across millions of strangers who will likely never personally interact with long-term acquaintances. But in doing so, they also removed much of the deeply personal social accountability early humans relied on for tens of thousands of years. Maybe that's the most interesting insight buried in this entire ancient pattern. Early humans didn't need prisons to maintain order, not because they were naturally more peaceful or morally superior in some way, but because their entire social structure made wrongdoing personally costly in ways that were immediate, direct, and impossible to escape or ignore.
So the next time you think about what keeps modern society functioning relatively peacefully, despite the complete absence of constant police presence everywhere, remember this: you still instinctively care what your friends, family, coworkers, and community think of you. That instinct isn't a modern social invention at all. It's one of the oldest survival mechanisms the human mind has ever developed, and it's still quietly working exactly as designed, even now. Maybe justice was never really about punishment for its own sake at all. Maybe it was always about protecting the trust that made human cooperation possible in the very first place. If this changed the way you think about justice, punishment, and accountability, make sure you subscribe to the channel
because we explore stories exactly like this every single week, uncovering how ancient humans really lived, fought, and survived long before recorded history began.